Well, I have a confession to make. I have a few bad habits, just a few. And one of them is that I'm not always paying attention when people are talking, especially with my family. Sometimes I get so caught up in what I'm thinking about or what I'm doing next that I am completely oblivious to what's going on around me. And there's been times where I've been reading and my husband will be talking to me and I say, and I have no clue what he just said. This happened one morning when my family was getting ready to get out the door and I was reading something or looking or responding to a text on my phone. And my husband said as he walked out the door, "I'm going to go sit in the car, tell Ethan I'm waiting for him." Because he drives my son every morning to morning workouts before school. So about 5 minutes goes by, and my son comes out with his coat on, his backpack, and says, "Where'd Dad go?" And I said, "I don't know, he must have left." Whoops. So my husband was not very happy with me when he came in and said, I told you I was waiting for him." So I heard what my husband said, but I wasn't actually listening. Last week, Pastor Michael talked about the Sermon on the Plain and how it differed from the Sermon on the Mount. The Sermon on the Plain addressed things a little bit more simply, like blessed are the poor, where the Sermon on the Mount took things a little bit into more abstract thoughts, like blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those hungering for thirst and righteousness, where the Spirit on the Plain talked about blessed are those who hunger. This week we get to the second half of that sermon. The trouble in the Bible this week, Jesus is telling people to love their enemies. And just why is he talking about loving their enemies? Who are the enemies of the people that we're talking about? Well, the people that were gathered in this crowd were people who were interested in what Jesus had to say, and they wanted to become disciples, or some of them probably were disciples. So the people that would be their enemies would be, for one, the Romans, because the Romans were inhabiting their area, a military presence, and they faced paying taxes that they didn't want to pay. A lot of times they were bullied or robbed, and the Roman people that were inhabiting were often abusive. The other possibility of the people that would be their enemies is those people who were skeptical of Jesus. People who were Pharisees or Sadducees, or people who stuck to the more traditional interpretation of the scripture. People who didn't think that Jesus knew what he was talking about. And they were skeptical of anybody who started following this new guy. And also people in Romans who worshipped the emperor and thought of Jews as atheists for not worshiping their gods. So this is the trouble that we're looking at in the Bible. And we have trouble in our world. We're lucky. Most of us have never faced a foreign government occupying our land. And if we're lucky, most of us never will. But we do face discrimination. Some of us have faced discrimination in our lives. Some for our age, our color, our gender, our sexual orientation, our politics, our ability or our disability. Some of us have been made fun for believing and being a Christian. I've heard skeptics refer to Christianity as belief in fairy tales. I've heard friends say they only believe in science. I know people who think that Christianity is ridiculous, but they practice Wicca. We're living in more and more of a post-Christian age. Some of you may have seen on Facebook that I shared a post that said, being taught to avoid talking about politics and religion has led to an understanding of both politics and religion. What we should have been taught was how to have a civil conversation about a difficult topic. And that's what we're talking about today. Uncomfortable conversations and relationships that we're uncomfortable with. People that don't share our views. Many of us have faced some of those isms. Sexism, racism. So what do you do if somebody calls you an ugly name? Steals from you? Slaps you? I admit, I have told my child when he went to school, you don't start fights, but you can finish them. I don't think that's quite how the Bible would have said it. But I admit I am guilty of that. The problem with an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth is that it leaves us in a society where everybody is blind and toothless. Jesus is commanding us to love our enemies. And this really goes against the norms of our society. In our society, privilege is based on wealth. And if you have enough money, you have the best doctors, you have the best seats on the airplane, you can have the best house in the best neighborhood. And in our society, conflict requires that we show strength through retaliation, which can lead to violence. And as a result, our heroes are not usually people that are poor and non-violent. They're usually wealthy or powerful. But Jesus offers us grace in the Bible. He gives us some advice. And unfortunately, the advice is the opposite of what our natural inclinations are. The common sense response is to love your friends and to hate your enemy. But Jesus has something different to say. He starts off by saying, you who are willing to hear. Remember when I talked about my listening problem? How I could hear what my husband was saying, but I wasn't paying attention? Well, apparently Jesus knew that the people he was talking to suffered from the same issues that I do. He's pointing out that only some of those people who were present were going to listen to what he had to say and to put it into practice. And you know this is true because at some point you have been in a situation where you knew what you were talking about and you were trying to explain it to somebody who wasn't listening and wasn't going to pay attention to any advice that you had to offer. I have looked at my sweet child in the eyes and said, please do not touch that hot stove. And he touched it anyway just to see what would happen. And you know that people are exactly the same way. So what is the natural response when someone yells, hey you bleeping moron? What is your natural response when somebody you don't like slaps you? What is your natural response to having someone borrow money and not pay you back? Most of you would say your natural response is to get angry, to get even. And that is what comes naturally. You may remember having heard Pastor Michael say that when something is repeated in the Bible, it's usually an indication that it's pretty important. And here we have something repeated. Not in the same words, in slightly different words. He's repeating the same phrase, love your enemies, in different ways so that in case we thought we might have misheard it or misunderstood it, that he makes it crystal clear what he is talking about. To love your enemy removes a barrier for who we treat with inclusiveness, who it is that is within our inner circle. And he is telling us that we are to treat everyone like they are in our inner circle. Everyone is our neighbor. Peacemaking is the character of God. God's love is indiscriminate. He says, do good to those who hate you. Love your enemy. Bless those who curse you. Love your enemy. Pray for those who mistreat you. Love your enemy. If someone slaps you, offer the other cheek. Love your enemy. If he asks for your coat, give them your shirt. Love your enemy. And when I preach on this verse, I do need to stop and take a moment to say, We are not endorsing physical abuse in any way or say that you need to accept that. If you are in a situation where you are being physically hurt, please seek help. And if you don't know how to get help, I can get with you and give you a number to call and help you find assistance. But right about here, we say, really, really, Jesus? The people who call you a fairy tale is who I'm supposed to love? The people who killed little innocent babies, I'm supposed to love? The people who shoot people in churches, I'm supposed to love? And Jesus says, yes. If you love those who love you, why should you be commended to praise? You think you get a gold star? Even sinners love those people. If you lend to people expecting repayment, even sinners lend, expecting to be paid back in full. Hello, banks. Instead, love your enemies. Do good. Lend nothing in return. This turns upside down the logic in our society and the ethic that we should only love those who are already offering us love and doing good to one another. Loving your enemies can have a range of meanings. To win them over with kindness, to take the moral high road, to shame them with your superior goodness, to deflect hostility or prevent further abuse by offering no resistance, to rise above pettiness, and to demonstrate Christ-like character. Jesus says, bless those who curse you, and if you do, we will have a great reward. You will be acting as the children of God. He is kind to ungrateful and wicked people. How many of you have said things that you know those are things that your parents said and heard yourself, that's my dad who just came out of me? That is what people should see. When you are around people, they should be able to see God coming out of you. Just like those other phrases that your mom said. He recalls Matthew's verse that blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God. There's two prohibitions, don't judge and don't condemn, followed by the commands to give and forgive. It affirms that those who are nonviolent and merciful will be treated the same way. Grace in the world. Have we ever seen this? Can it work? Does it work? Jesus, I really love Jesus, but are we supposed to be wimps? Just stand there? And the answer is no. Because nonviolence is not the way of the weak. It is the way of the strong. Those willing to stand up and say that you do not end violence with violence. You do not change people's mind on bigotry, racism, sexism, homosexuality, or politics by punching them, stealing from them, or shooting them. You change people's minds with love. Two examples of this are Mahatma Gandhi and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Gandhi and his freedom movement in India was significant because it was done non-violently. Gandhi traveled to England, where he was educated as a lawyer, and got a job with an Indian company that required him to work in South Africa. And while in South Africa, he suffered racism and discrimination. He bought a first-class ticket for a train, was told to sit in the third-class seat, and he refused. He was escorted off by police. He was then told that because he was Indian, he needed to register and be fingerprinted. He refused, and he was jailed. And while in jail, he read Civil Disobedience by Henry David Thoreau. And after 20 years being in South Africa, he came home to India. And by the time he came home, he was a celebrity for speaking against apartheid and his resistance. And he decided he needed to fight for the injustices he saw in his own country. He wanted British rule to end. He wanted an end to the Hindu-Muslim disunity, which caused many deaths. and he wanted the discrimination against the untouchables to end. And he did not achieve everything that he wanted to achieve, but he did accomplish a great many things non-violently, through strikes and civil disobedience. Gandhi's actions inspired Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and he also confronted injustice with non-violent methods. I'd like to share with you some of the thoughts taken from Dr. King's outline of the philosophy of nonviolence. The outline proclaims that the highest expression of non-injury is love. And this love means that you focus your attention on the evil system and not the evildoer, which is hard. That takes a lot of internal strength. The nonviolent resistor separates the evil from the evildoer. And while trying to eliminate that evil, save the evildoer. Gandhi said the true litmus test of a nonviolent conflict was that there was no animosity left behind.